Thank you. That's an excellent point. It is right at 2 o'clock, and we should get started. So if we may officially start, thank you so much for joining. This is Johnny Lee. And with us, I'm very honored and very excited to be working with Mr. Edward Stern. Ed and I know each other from the Alliance Against Workplace Violence, which is a great organization. Ed is with the U.S. Department of Labor and also does quite a bit of work with the unions as well. I'm going to let him introduce himself and more his experience with this issue. But just a couple of quick things, just important things. I'm Johnny Lee. I'm the president of the Panic Button, which is sort of sponsoring this, kind of makes it all free for everyone. Directed for you all, if you're not familiar with GoToMeeting, there's a way you can raise your hand. If you have a really important point, I can send you a chat if you want to speak or say or ask a question. Otherwise, if you look at this questions tab, if you expand that, you enter a question, then I can read out your questions. Now, I'm fine answering your questions, or Ned and I discussed that we can answer them along till we go, but we certainly will reserve time at the end. It's about 45 minutes with some time for a Q&A at the end. There we go. That's all I have to say. Ed, please take it away.
Okay. Thank you, Johnny. I thought it might be helpful if I just explain how I get into this. I am, by training and experience, an analyst of legislation and policy and regulations, also enforcement strategies and compliance assistance programs. And more recently, in the last couple of years, I've been working on developing intelligent, interactive problem-solving systems, which we call expert advisors. So that's what I do ordinarily. But some years ago, I got involved in the issue of workplace bullying because a terrific, highly educated young woman quit her job. This is somebody I was looking forward to working with. She said, if you want to understand why I'm quitting, study workplace bullying. So I began to read and analyze and research and write about this as I've done on other issues. That's what I do. And I do similar analysis on other labor relations and bargaining issues. And indeed, last year, one of the issues we bargained over was improving communications on what you can do if you have a very difficult workplace. And the union and the department work very well together in developing a new page to point out what your choices are. Let's go to the next slide. Okay. This is a quick overview. We're going to cover a lot of material, but Johnny's given me a lot of time. We're going to look at bullying as psychological violence and aggression, talk about what is criticism and what's not, what's abuse, who the targets and perpetrators are in some cases. And I want to distinguish between harassment of people in protected classes and status-blind harassment. Those are harassment of people who are not protected, people in protected classes. And we'll look at some definitions of psychological harassment and intimidation. Typically, you'll see these in workplace violence programs. And you will see some information about covert nonverbal aggression, which is frankly not well addressed in many programs. We do have I think, a very good model anti-bullying program, which I found on the Washington State Labor and Industry website. And I want to show you, I'm going to share today a little study that I did earlier in the year on interpreting behavior in the context of details, which shows you that as you begin to understand more of what's happening, maybe you'll take a different look at what's going on. And finally, just a brief look at the physical implications and impact of psychological aggression. This, frankly, I was helped on by a friend of mine who's now a retired professor of neurological pharmacology. So we can go on to page 6. Everybody knows Mark Twain. not everybody's read Life on the Mississippi, which I certainly recommend to you. It is a documentary. It's not a novel. It's got a lovely discussion of life there, and in it, he talks about his interaction with a river pilot who abused all within his reach. He wrote that Brown, the pilot, was an ignorant, stingy, malicious, snarling, fault-hunting, moat-magnifying tyrant. He says, I early got in the habit of coming on watch with dread in my heart. No matter how good a time I might have been having with the off watch below, and no matter how high my spirits might have been when I started aloft, that's up to the pilot house, my soul became lead in my body the moment I approached the pilot house. I thought this was a nice description of how many people feel today going to work for bullies. I certainly know that's true for some of the people that I've worked with, that I've helped. Let's go to the next page. In the same chapter, he talks of thoughts of revenge. He says, I often wanted to kill Brown, but this would not answer. A cub, that is a junior, an apprentice pilot, had to take everything his boss gave in the way of vigorous comment and criticism. However, I could imagine myself killing Brown. There was no law against that, and that was the thing I used always to do the moment I was in bed. And he says, I killed Brown every night for months. And there's some interesting elements to this that I'm leaving out. You have to read the book. But so at least he here was only thinking about doing it. Let's turn next page to some stories that Johnny sent me recently. Here's a case that didn't end so well. Billy Davis at the gas company complained to Human Resources that his supervisor was verbally abusive, treated him unfairly. The family said the dispute's been ongoing for several years, but Billy felt like his complaints were not taken seriously. So, one day, when there was supposed to be a meeting with the boss, Billy Davis brought in a cake for his co-workers before the meeting, and he also brought in a gun with which he used to kill his supervisor, then himself. That's unfortunately happens. And let's take another case very similar. There's Elijah Brown of the food processing plant. Really, this is pretty sad. He killed 4 co-workers and himself. The surviving, notice it says the surviving employees stated that Brown felt that he was being picked on and teased by others. One fellow relates how he kidded Brown about always having chicken burritos for lunch. This fellow was lucky for some reason because he got away. Oops, I just lost my screen. Hang on a second. Okay. Oh, because I wasn't moving the mouse. So the shooting spree showed them the motivations. Apparently he told some, you're good to go, and let them go. But he said, this is what you get for messing with me, to the people he shot. So sometimes the people who are subject to psychological violence end up hurting themselves, and sometimes they end up hurting others, and others will see. So what's violence? Everybody knows that physical violence is violence. We understand that. But it seems that many do not know, recognize, or view psychological aggression as violence. I think for me it helps to talk about psychological aggression, and you can fit it into place. This idea of psychological aggression being a form of violence is not new. It's rather old. I found a reference to it 1800 years ago in the Babylonian Talmud. It's a compendium of Jewish law that's really of older material, and it says to humiliate a man before his peers is equal to drawing blood. That is to say, physical injury. And this is, to me, this relates very closely to what happened to the case of the college kid who spied on his gay roommate and humiliated him with showing what was happening with this fellow, and the man then ended up in killing himself. This was just decided in court a couple of days ago. So it's not a new idea. Let's go on to the next page. I was pleased 2 years ago to see that in a survey by the Federal Merit Systems Protection Board, they had a question on workplace violence, and they defined it as this. Workplace violence is defined as violent acts directed toward a person at work or on duty, e.g., that is, physical assaults, threats of assault, harassment, intimidation, or bullying. So we're not talking just about smacking somebody. You can smack them psychologically, and that's also workplace violence by virtue of the definition used by this organization. Let's go to the next page. I thought this is a particularly useful link, and I have included the link at the bottom of the page for you. Here's Special Agent Eugene Rugala in a particularly useful paper on workplace violence, and he notes that, you know, people are paying attention, but analysts have broadly agreed that responding to workplace violence requires attention to more than just an actual physical attack. Homicide and other physical assaults are on a continuum that also includes domestic violence, stalking, threats, harassment, bullying, emotional abuse, intimidation, and other forms of conduct that create anxiety and fear and a climate of distrust in the workplace. The bolding there is mine, but in the last sentence, the all in bold and italics, that's in the FBI paper. All are part of the workplace violence problem. I thought this was a nice description, and let's go to the next. Last year, the Department of Health and Human Services sent out an email to all of their employees, and unfortunately I can't give you a link to the email. This was sent in email to the employees, but I haven't been able to find it, the very same thing on the web. I just have a copy of it, stating their anti-bullying policy. And they say in here, bullying occurs when people use their power via verbal, physical, or other means to control or harm others. And I think it's very important to note here that it means that they refer to other means to control or harm others, because it isn't always verbal or physical. They have more detail on the next slide. I like that this definition: bullying is conduct that constitutes fighting, threats, and can you hear me all right?
Yes.
Okay, good. An intent to inflict harm, abusive, offensive, unprofessional, distracting, that's peculiar, slanderous, malicious, derogatory, otherwise inappropriate, unacceptable language intended to degrade or humiliate a particular person or group of people. That's pretty good. There's only one problem with this, and that is it refers to inappropriate or unacceptable language, and it overlooks acts or deliberate non-acts, which is a little hard to describe, but nonverbal covert bullying is missing in this otherwise very good message to the employees. And by the way, this is on the page, so you can find this. Pardon me. No, this is part of the statement from the email. That's not on the page, but the department's guidelines are in the link that I've provided in this.
Say, Ed, I think at this point we talked about seeing what people's personal experience were with bullying.
Yes, please. You want to do your survey?
Right? I think so. Well, I'll keep it short. Let me see what the audience looks like. You should have a poll in front of you, and you can click on it. And we're just curious about your experience with bullying, whether you experienced it personally, or if you witnessed other people experience it. We're getting the answers. You can click, and we're getting some responses. I'll give it a few more seconds here. And there's no tracking. I have no idea who's responding. We just have final numbers. I don't know who entered what in the poll. Just a few more seconds. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. I'm closing it up. And then I will share with you.
All right, good.
Oh, there we go. So do you see that, Ed? Do you see the responses of the participants?
Yes, I do. And if you don't mind, while we're stopping for this poll, I have to comment on it. These numbers look like numbers that I found when I conducted a study at the Labor Department. Oh my goodness, I think this was 2005 or 2006. And the percentage was so high, I thought perhaps that I did not have a representative sample. And in my analysis, I offered some alternative way of looking at it. And it was only years later that I found more and more surveys that I discovered that the numbers I had were not unreasonable at all. So
right.
This is not an unreasonable. Unfortunately, this is not an unreasonable estimate of what typically happens.
Well, that's interesting. That's really interesting. Well, I'll go back to you should be able to see the slides.
Okay.
And
fine.
Yes, thank you. So thank you so much.
Good. Okay. No, thank you for conducting that. It's interesting. And I see we have a good new group participating, and I'm glad everybody's here. I think it's important, since I have been both a union activist and also a supervisor, to point out that managers have the right and responsibility to review and to criticize, as well as to praise, I hope that's often, employees' work. The purpose of criticism, praise, is to, and given in a professional manager, is to inform and to guide. So the purpose of criticizing an employee or anyone in front of other managers, employees, customers, or acquaintances is to cause pain through humiliation of the target. And a secondary purpose is to intimidate the audience, to let them know that they could also be targets. That's one of the ways you keep people in line. You bully 1 or 2 people at a time, and you can see that it sends the message that you could be next. So even if you're not the immediate target, if you witness the bullying, that has some adverse impact too. And certainly this kind of behavior is bullying. It's verbal abuse. Let's go on to the next page. You want to hit the 16. So here's a way of looking at unprofessional criticism. Incessant criticism, nitpicking, degrading, and demeaning of the worker rather than of his or her work. Right away, you know that's a problem. And disparaging comments about a worker to others to hurt the person's reputation. That's not proper criticism from the manager, certainly, or anybody else. These are examples of psychological aggression. Randy Wood was, I think she still is, I haven't talked to her for a while, director of Colorado State EAP, Employee Assistance Program, and she wrote in a good essay, bullying is not a management style, it is abuse. It's about anger and aggressiveness. And I have below here the link to the name of her article in the Advisor, which is a publication of the Colorado Department of Personnel Administration. Bullying is not a management style; it is abuse. So, although obviously there are some managers who are bullies, and I understand from the recent book on Steve Jobs that although he was a genius, he was a terrible bully. So he probably lost a few good people out of that. Let's go to the next page. The other thing to keep in mind when you're running into bad behavior is that even the best person, anybody, can have a bad day. So I think it's useful to remember that to consider rude, obnoxious words or actions from someone who is known for civility, who you know to be a decent person otherwise, but who has a bad day once a year or less frequently. Let's keep that in mind. Even the best people can have such a time and a bad day, lose their composure and civility. I hope that people like this usually recognize that they've been rude and they apologize, no matter which direction it is. So my thought is, if this is not the way a person usually behaves, then it's fair to cut them some slack, although you might make a note of it. It is, any of us can have a bad day and be overly abrupt. I'm probably guilty of that myself. I hope not too often. So let's go on to the next page. Oops. So I also want to draw a distinction here between bullying at work and bullying at schools. There's a lot of discussion on bullying at schools, but the situation at work in many respects is can be much more threatening. In schools, the physically strong can injure or intimidate the physically weak. The socially strong or powerful may mock, ridicule, or freeze out the socially weak. Well, that's painful. I understand that. In the workplace, threats of physical coercion or, could prompt action under any workplace violence program, and I hope your companies have a workplace violence program, or they could prompt a complaint to the police. So you're not likely to see that kind of behavior. Instead, at work, power over your job, your raise, your work tasks, that is your assignments, your working conditions, your sense of worth is much more intimidating than just physical strength. So sure, workplace bullying, school bullying is bad, but it may not be nearly as bad as bullying at work, where you have to go to earn a living. Let's go to the next page. So let's talk about targets. Obviously, I'm in the federal government. People think that it's not possible to get rid of federal employees. Let me tell you that it is. I know, since both from the management side and the union side. Management does have the power to get rid of, poor employees, even in the federal government. It's not necessary to bully them out. That's not necessary. So if the weak or unsatisfactory employees are not likely to be the targets of bullying, I don't think they are, who is? Frankly, over and over again, I see that highly capable, highly motivated employees may well be and often are targets of bullying and psychological aggression by envious, insecure, narcissistic managers or co-workers, usually because they're jealous of a person's education, ability, their experience, their knowledge, their sociability, or even their looks. And if you have all of those and you have an insecure manager or coworker, they're going to be hostile, unfortunately. I wish it were not so, but that's the way it is. The next page, please. Now, some people will have protection against harassment of this sort as a result of being members of a protected class. But the EEO provisions, EEO is limited in its protection and prevention of harassment. Typically, I find that policies to prevent harassment and discrimination based on protected characteristics are adopted to protect employers from being sued by employees in legally protected classes. Here's a statement from the Department of Labor's policy, and this is something that you would see in many, many places. Unfortunately, this one is on the internal site and it's not accessible to the public, but you would see the same thing in many places. And they write, definition of harassing conduct. For purposes of this policy, harassing conduct is defined. So here's the definition. As any unwelcome verbal or physical conduct based on any characteristic protected by law. And then they give the criteria. Well, so it's only tied to these protected characteristics, and those are described on the next page. Let's go to the next page. So it says, under this policy, harassing conduct is defined as any unwelcome conduct, verbal or physical, based on race, color, religion, sex, national origin, age, disability, parental status, sexual orientation, or genetic information, and so forth. Well, frankly, these policies are good as far as they go. They will be helpful to some people. But let's go on to the next page. Question is, what's missing from that definition? And the answer is that the EEO-based definition of harassment is limited to only a specific subset of all real harassment. So is it a policy to prevent harassment? No, not really. It's a policy to prevent harassment of people in protected class. It is intended and it's valuable to protect women from sexual harassment and women and minorities from non-sexual harassment, from other harassment. It provides no protection for members of the majority, for things that are not related to sexual harassment. So it fails when a straight, white, middle-aged, Christian man harasses, abuses, torments, and bullies another straight, white, middle-aged Christian man, and I should have added, of similar ability. I think we covered that. Case where, in such cases I'm describing at the bottom of this page, that is outside of the scope of the policy for preventing harassment because it's rather limited. So we have to look for some other avenue to protect you and other employees. Let's go on to the next page. As we point out, if a bully harasses, demeans, and humiliates people of different religions, that is several different religions, races, ethnicities, and so forth, the EEO policy doesn't work because the abuser has the defense. He says, I didn't harass the complainant due to race, color, or gender. I treat everybody that way. And frankly, that is a good defense. His behavior is that he's just obnoxious to everybody. So it isn't going to be a matter that you'll be able to make a good case under your EEO provisions. Equal employment, equal opportunity harassment is not harassing behavior under the definition set forth in the policies. Instead, you're going to have to look for some help in workplace violence programs if they're good. Let's take a look. Next page. Here is one from the manual at the National Institutes of Health. And I've included a link because this is accessible to the public. It says an action at an NIH facility representing, oops, wait a minute, hang on a sec. If I don't move my mouse, the monitor goes off. An action at an NIH facility or by an individual while officially representing NIH that in the opinion of a reasonable person constitutes a threat of harm to a person or damage to property and so forth, or an action that results in intentional infliction of a physical harm to a person or actual damage to property and includes intimidating, harassing, or violent behavior as defined below. So at this point, it looks like they're talking about physical action, but fortunately they have a very good definition in the next slide. So let's go on and you'll see their details. Here's where they define it. Because remember, they're referring to intimidating, harassing behavior. They say conduct which in the opinion of a reasonable person creates a hostile environment, impairs agency operations, or frightens, alarms, or inhibits others. This may include making statements which are false, malicious, disparaging, derogatory, rude, disrespectful, abusive, obnoxious, and so forth. Notice it includes insubordinate, which I think doesn't belong because anybody who's insubordinate to his boss is automatically in trouble. Boss doesn't need this policy to protect himself or herself from an insubordinate employee. So to me, this doesn't make sense. But which otherwise have the intent to hurt a reputation. That's good. And it goes on, I think most valuably, to say physical intimidation and harassment, blah, blah. Oh, and then I went on to the intimidating, harassing behavior may cause bodily or emotional injury, pain, or distress. So this is particularly good. I like this definition because it recognizes the emotional injury, pain, or distress. By the way, as I say, this is accessible to the public. This is on our public site. So now we compare the workplace violence program bring harassment versus harassment policies. The policies set forth in the previous slide are much broader than EEO harassment prevention policies. They're not limited to behavior related only to protected classes. In this case, I'll go back again, and here we have the straight, white, Christian woman who publicly humiliates another straight, white, Christian woman of similar age and physical ability, which I should have included in the earlier one, would be covered by these provisions. It's not an EEO harassment matter, but it is something that falls under workplace violence program because it's psychological intimidation. My one concern about these policies is that they emphasize and they're clear on behavior that's overt and verbal. They do not clearly address nonverbal and other hidden psychological aggression. So we'll take a look at that. Let's go on to the next page. The Canadian Centre for Occupational Safety and Health has a very good bullying site, and it has both verbal and nonverbal behaviors. And here I've picked up some of their covert nonverbal bullying behavior, which is often overlooked. And I frankly think I see more of this than of the overt verbal behavior, excluding isolating someone socially. Well, you know, look, you don't have to sit with people you don't like, but you do have to work with people, whether you like them or not. Undermining or deliberately impeding a person's work. removing areas of responsibility without cause, constantly changing work guidelines, setting up impossible deadlines so the person will fail. At a certain point, you got to realize that these are hostile acts, withholding necessary information or purposefully giving the wrong information, intruding on a person's privacy by pestering, spying, or stalking, which of course is the kind of thing that happened with this college kid spying on his roommate. These are some examples, and we have some other examples on the next slide of the covert nonverbal bullying. Let's go to the next slide. Assigning unreasonable duties and workload that are unfavorable to one person. I already have I know about a case like this now. By the way, I am an OSHA steward right now, but I also handle labor relations things in other parts of the Labor Department. Since I'm an old steward, the President of the Union assigns me to other cases, so I don't want you to think that I'm just talking about the problems with OSHA. Actually, we have a lot of good managers and a few who could be improved. Underwork, creating a feeling of uselessness. That's a way of bullying somebody out, and that, by the way, doesn't happen just at for staff. That can happen at a very high level. Senior executives, unwarranted and undeserved punishment, blocking applications for training. I had a grievance like this last year, and it turned out that there was lots of mischief all behind this, and it was uncovered with a little bit of research. So, and I'll come to that later. You've got to look into what's actually happening. It's not always what it looks like. Tampering with a person's belongings, personal belongings work. I know somebody who was fired for that and probably deserved it. The point is, this list of covert, nonverbal aggressive behavior is actually longer than the list of verbal aggressive behavior on the Canadian list, and this list does not have everything that could be included. There are many, many more ways, non-obvious ways, to undermine somebody and to torment a coworker, unfortunately. And I think this is something that needs more attention. Let's go to the next page. I'll be quick on this because I see we're using up a lot of time. This is a very good model workplace bullying program. It's from the state of Washington on their Labor and Industry site, and I've given you the link to it. I think it has it's just on 2 slides you'll see it really covers a lot of material, and I like in particularly that they point out in the middle here in red, workplace bullying may cause the loss of trained and talented employees, reduce productivity and morale, and create legal risks. That's a message, I think, to managers in particular. And I have seen it over and over again. Sometimes the best people just don't want to work for bad managers, and they leave. And then a company or the agency, whether it's a business, a church, a nonprofit, whatever, government, you lose talent, and that's a loss. So I also like that they state that managers and supervisors must ensure employees are not bullied. Let's go to page 30. And this, the model program goes on to provide a statement of how they're going to do investigations and encourage employees to report, and promises that action will be taken, so forth, and gives a name and number of a person to call. All in all, this is short and sweet. I think it's a nice little model. If you're in an organization that doesn't have a policy, I think this is a good one that they could start from. It may do everything you need, or you can add more. Now let's take a look at another angle on this. On the next page. Earlier this year, I invited people on the Occupational Health Psychology listserv to participate in the crowdsourcing exercise. I set up a short survey, and I did not tell them, as you see, I did not identify the topic. The purpose of this was to avert self-selection of participants interested in issues relating to bullying. So I wanted to have a fair audience. Let's go on and take a look. I think this is, I thought this was illuminating, and I wanted to share it with you, although I'm running out of time. Next page. So I created 5 scenarios, and by the way, these scenarios for the most part are similar. I just am adding additional information as I go along and letting people reevaluate their answers as they go. In this case, the office addresses complex problems. A supervisor sends in a professional employee to take a remedial writing course. You know, what do you think? Is it good practice? Might be appropriate. Raises doubt. Might be harassment. You can think about what your answer is. Let's hop on through to the next one. In this case, the second scenario is I've made note that it was a male supervisor with a female professional employee. They both have law degrees and are members of the bar. Well, that prompted some rethinking. And the next slide. We added further information. Woman graduated from Ivy League University in a prestigious law school. Supervisor attended good schools, but they were not of the same rank. And I added another choice here that I didn't have earlier. That is, it is harassment, not just might be. So you can look that this option is there. And we'll go to scenario 4. It's coming up. Oh, no, we went too far, Johnny. You want to go back to, okay. We added that she had 10 years of high success before he was appointed the supervisor. Actually, he didn't know about this stuff. And she had a verbal SAT score over 720. I had questions from a couple of people about this one. I think a professor of medicine and professor of, oh my goodness, probably professor of psychology who said, you think this is a fair indicator? And I argue that based on my experience with very highly skilled people, that an SAT score over 720 is a good clue that this person is going to be a very good writer, because obviously the person is 99th percentile, actually a higher person. Okay, so you see that I'm just building up information, providing further information, and let's hit the last one. And finally, we notice that he assigned a remedial writing course 6 weeks after she was called as a witness to testify under oath about his verbal abuse of someone else. So, and by the way, we added another choice here, F, that it is retaliation. Now let's look at the chart on the next page, which I think is quite revealing. To begin with, and you can see it as well as I, to begin with, more than 70% of the people thought it was either a good practice or might be appropriate. Some people had some doubts. As soon as they saw that they were both, that's he and she, were lawyers, that 72% dropped to 35% of people who thought it might be appropriate. More people had doubts. As soon as we indicated there was top schools versus lesser known, the might be harassment and is harassment certainly increased. And finally, I'll skip the middle one, and finally at the end, when people realized that this occurred shortly after she testified about the abuse of another, 60% of the people said they viewed it as retaliation. I think we had a decent number of respondents. It was not a biased group. I would have liked to have a little bigger group, but I think that this is indicates that people are going to interpret things when they see, they'll interpret them differently when they have more information. So let's go to the next page, Tony. So, point is, words in act must be understood in context. An act that appears to be appropriate may be hostile when you see it in the full context. In this case, I think a neutral audience overwhelmingly smelled a rat as they learned more of the context. They saw harassment and retaliation and the assignment of remedial training to an employee who's gifted. So, suddenly, and under the circumstances, I thought that was a reasonable conclusion. I have one more page, and then I'm done. And we'll open up for additional questions. I just want to point to, this is a very limited list of some of the impacts of psychological aggression, the physical impacts. And there's some number of many interesting studies I've read that psychological stress will reduce the effectiveness and the efficiency of the immune system. People end up getting sick, they have rashes and sleeplessness. They end up with thoughts of harming the bully or themselves, and sometimes they do, sad to say. Of course, this can lead to reduced productivity. It may lead to mental or emotional illness and days away from work because you're sick or going to doctor's visits. And under some circumstances, these may be recordable days for OSHA days away from work on the OSHA lot. But you have to go through one of my projects, the OSHA record keeping advisor will help you analyze that one. This is as much as I think we can cover in the time allowed. So let me stop and see if there's any questions that I can help you on.
That was wonderful. Thank you so much, Ed. I think that you covered a lot of information in a short amount of time. One quick question I want to answer for everyone. We are providing the slides to everyone afterwards. About 4 hours after the presentation, you'll get an email with a link to the slides, and hopefully we'll record it. One question, though, that did come up earlier. Someone had this question. Is it bullying if the management in a company regularly reminds the lower-ranking employees that they are lucky to have jobs in this economy? Like that sort of comment, you know, you're lucky to have a job at all during these hard economic times.
Well, the problem is it may be a true statement that that in this economy they're lucky to have a job, but reminding people is demeaning. You know, I mean, I think it's a thinly veiled threat. It may not be meant that way. I'm willing to be charitable and take it the best possible interpretation. Although I certainly am suspicious. But even if it were not meant to intimidate, it certainly would have the effect of being worrisome, because one, it's true. You know, there is a lot of unemployment, and being reminded of that is, I think, demeaning. And it certainly is not going to, it's a very subtle form of bullying, and it certainly isn't going to build loyalty and employee engagement. The Gallup organization, consulting, you know, they not just polling, but also a consulting firm, talks about employee engagement. And if you want to get people involved and committed to the organization, you have to treat them with respect. Otherwise, they just do enough to keep their jobs. They're not going to be the people who are going to do the extra themselves and help others.
Right. If I may, you have a bunch of questions coming in. Someone made this observation. I noticed that the MSPB, FBI, and the Department of Health and Human Services all have the word bullying, the specific term bullying, in their policy. but the National Institute of Health does not mention bullying. Do you find that the word bullying is excluded in some areas?
Yeah, that's very interesting. It's a good question. Indeed, I sent a note on this very thing to the Deputy Assistant Secretary for Administration here at the Labor Department in proposing something. This is a man I know very well and worked with on some emergency and security projects. And I said, you ought to address this. And his response was, well, our workplace violence program covers bullying. So although it doesn't say it, when the Deputy Assistant Secretary puts it in email, which of course I then send and share with the union leadership, that becomes a statement of policy. But I think it's desirable to put it in, and in a way you can see the distinction, because the NIH Workplace Violence Program doesn't say it, but the NIH is a component of Department of Health and Human Services, and here they are announcing that they have a workplace bullying policy in their email, but by golly, I sure couldn't find it on the website. It's only an email.
Right.
It would be good to be putting it right there, plain and simple.
Here's a question. Of the 4 elements of human communication, 1, the spoken word, 2, facial expressions, 3, tone of voice, and 4, body language, do any of these play a substantially different role in bullying?
Oh, that's a subtle question. Matter of fact, I didn't get to that, but I guess I'm not sure that I'm the best person to answer. I certainly am conscious of the fact that glaring, staring, giving a cold, mean expression to somebody conveys contempt and dismissiveness just as well as a word. You don't have to say a word to somebody to express to them what you think if you know how to put on an evil eye.
Right.
I think the facial expressions probably are very good in communicating this.
Sure.
The postures and so forth, that's not something I really understand that well.
Here's another good question. Either in your opinion personally or from the literature review, is there evidence that having the political will at the top of the organization is both essential and crucial for changing long-standing behavioral patterns?
Well, I certainly would expect it to be very important. It's if the people at the top don't get it, then the people below them are not likely to act, because I mean, I deal with high political officials and occasionally, and the people immediately around them are, of course, trying to influence them and curry favor. That's the way it is. That's reality, probably, in the government, any other social institution. So they will definitely take their lead from the leadership. And if indeed, the thing is, the things we're talking about here of treating people with respect, that doesn't mean you have to say that everybody's doing a good job. If somebody's not doing a good job, you have to tell them that. But that's a different thing than treating people with respect. And the companies that don't treat people with respect and they ignore bullying situations, they end up losing talent, or they end up with tragedies.
Excellent. We have a question. Someone who works for New York State, our Department of Labor doesn't use the word bullying at all in their workplace violence prevention policy. Oh, one little note. I'm not going to say who said this, but you have a really good union, and some of the folks there in the union who do the support in New York State for state employees, they'd be great allies. But can you speak to that about the fact that the Department of Labor doesn't use the word bullying in their policy?
Well, I would say look at the workplace violence program. Many of them, and I've looked at a lot, certainly haven't seen them all, but many do talk about psychological intimidation and harassment, and they specify behavior, and we have that in the slides here. I use the Department of Labor's definition, which you could find in many other places. There's nothing unique about it. They certainly are describing bullying behavior. To my thinking, the limitation is that they're focusing on overt verbal aggressive behavior, and they're missing the more subtle nonverbal behavior, which in fact can be actions to interrupt somebody's work, or deliberate, and it's important to recognize it can be deliberate inactions by refusing to do something, by refusing to respond to requests for meeting, by refusing to let somebody do things that they reasonably should have. That's another way of bullying people. It's not an act, it's a refusal to act. I'm not going to act on this. And consequently, you demean and make a person small, and they eventually, people don't even know sometimes right away that this is a hostile act. But after a couple, they begin to realize what it is. And of course, then they're more demoralized, and they don't want to, they're less likely to be the best possible employee.
Right. Boy, there's so many good questions out there. One, and I want to respect people's time. We're just about at 3 o'clock. We can certainly continue on, but if people need to get going, we understand. One other question: is there a difference between harassment and bullying? Harassment versus bullying. What's the difference? I think you kind of touched on that earlier, but any more thoughts on that?
Well, to me, they're indistinguishable, but you would see they use the word harassment consistently in the EEO type of policies, where they talk about discrimination and harassment based on protected, that's related to the people in a protected class, and that's simply because I think the word harassment has probably been around longer, but I wouldn't draw too much distinction between them.
Okay. Here's an interesting question. What role does mental illness play in bullying? I'm convinced that our office bully, the ringleader, quote unquote, is 2 clicks away from a sociopath. Mental health issues around bullying.
Yeah, I am not a learned person on this, so I hesitate, but I have discussed this with a friend of mine who's a psychiatrist, and after I was dealing with one person who was whose behavior was so strange, and I just never saw behavior like this. I talked to one of my buddies who was a psychotherapist and described over lunch what I was seeing, and he pointed me in the direction of looking at the narcissistic personality disorder and the American version. And by golly, we found, and I discussed it with some coworkers and so forth, and what we saw was this person was exhibiting 9 out of 9 of the traits we thought of this disorder. But I discussed it with my friend the psychiatrist at a picnic one afternoon, and said, how do you deal with these people? And he said, you can't. Just get away from them. He said, they're very difficult. He said, they're almost impossible to change. And yes, they have a disorder, but those people, at least they're not crazy. He said, they're not crazy. They can function. They just drive other people crazy. And this is a guy who manages a psychiatric department of a hospital, and is a very down-to-earth, solid guy. And over a period of time, a number of the people who worked for that individual left because they thought they just couldn't deal with the individual. It was just too upsetting. So, and I think it's sociopathic behavior, but not quite. I mean, a person can still function like that. Some of these people do function, and they drive good talent away. I have seen it happen several times, and one person I know was a manager working for a senior person like that. Said, "I don't want to work. I'll go back to my senior staff job," and he gave up a good pay raise, went back to his senior staff job, and later, when another opportunity arose, he went back and took another management job working for someone else, and he's terrific talent. In the meantime, you know, an organization like that loses the talent from a very good person because they don't rein in this kind of bullying, narcissistic personality.
Absolutely. Golly, hey, we're just a little after 3 o'clock Eastern Standard Time, or Eastern Daylight Savings Time, and we have, I think we hit all of the questions. I want to see if there's anyone else out there. Some other people agree that New York has a good union, and a lot of people saying thank you. So unless there's any other questions, I was going to roll on. Was there any final words you want to say, Ed?
No, I thank you for inviting me to speak, and I thank folks for coming to participate. I hope you don't have to deal with these people, but it's a very good chance that sooner or later you will, in which case,
that's right.
Keep notes. Keep notes, and I think it's useful if it's your boss or coworker not responding, then go above their head, because the business will pick up, jobs will become more available, we hope, and
right.
The good people are just going to turn around and move on to other places.
That's right. Thank you so much. This was excellent. I was going to get the presentation already to send out to folks, so you'll be getting that